Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to give everybody just a few seconds to get added to the meeting. 1 second. Okay, we can go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining, everyone. I wanted to let you guys know when you join today, you will be on mute. So if you do want to speak up, please make sure to unmute yourself. Thanks for joining today's session of our age-friendly geriatric education tele-echo series, Enhancing Your Client's Health Check. And today's topic is going to be focusing on changes in condition, elder abuse, and neglect. We are going to be recording this session, and it will be sent in our next newsletter early next week. So if you know anybody that wanted to attend today that could not, please feel free to share that video with them. This is the structure of our echo session, starting with announcements, introductions, and followed by a quick 30-minute didactic, and then moving on into our case presentation with collaborative discussion, and followed by our closing and reminders. Just as a few house rules, please make sure you do mute yourself to prevent background noise. Introduce yourself prior to speaking with your name and location. Always maintain confidentiality when speaking about your clients, and of course, respect others and their opinions. This series is approved by the California Board of Registered Nursing. You will receive CE certificate at the end of this series with the total number of CEs you have received. Please be sure to complete the CE form sent to you in the follow-up email after each session if you would like credits. Certificates will be submitted or can be submitted to your own licensing board for reciprocity. Our series is a part of the HRSA Geriatric Workforce Enhancement Grant at UC Irvine. This information or content and conclusions are those of the author and should not be construed as the official position or policy of HRSA, HHS, or the U.S. government. Again, we're truly thankful to Meals on Wheels California for your partnership and all that you're doing to serve the communities and older adults. Thank you for joining today. We are going to go ahead and move on into our introductions. So please take a second because we have about 50 people on the line. So unfortunately, we can't do all the introductions via video. So please, in the chat function, if you can, list your name, your role, your site, and your location. We love to see where everyone's joining us from. We'll go ahead and get started with the Hub team introducing themselves, and I'll get started. My name is Nika Seville, and I'm the project manager for our Geriatric Workforce Enhancement Program at UC Irvine Health, and we're located in Orange County, California. I'll go ahead and have Dr. Gibbs introduce herself.
Hi, Lisa Gibbs, Chief of Geriatrics at the University of California School of Medicine.
Thank you, Dr. Gibbs, and Dr. Sagal.
Hey everybody, welcome. I'm Sonia Sagal. I'm a geriatrician also at the University of California, Irvine.
Enter your meeting on.
And Geraldine.
Hi everybody, happy Friday. Thank you for being here. My name is Geraldine Date, and I'm part of the Senior Health Center team here on the UCI Medical Center campus, and I'm a social worker.
Your participant ID followed by
Thank you, Geraldine. Carlos is not here with us today, but we have our guest Hub team members. So Carlos, Jorge, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, good afternoon. My name is Jorge Soler. I'm the Assistant Director of the Elder Abuse Forensic Center. And as a side note, just want to let you know that my wife and I have been Meals on Wheels volunteers for quite a while.
Thank you so much, Jorge. Looks like we have quite a few people on the line from Sacramento, San Francisco. Let's see, a lot from San Francisco and Sacramento and Orange County, Oakland. Thank you all for joining today. We have a lot on the agenda, so we'll go ahead and move on into our didactic presentation that is going to be focusing on changes in condition, elder abuse and neglect, again, presented by Dr. Lisa Gibbs, Chief of the Division of Geriatric Medicine and Gerontology here at UC Irvine, and Jorge Soler, which is the Assistant Director of the Orange County Elder Abuse and Forensic Center. Go ahead, Dr. Gibbs.
All right, thank you very
Jorge.
much. We're excited to be back, and I'm especially excited to welcome Mr. Soleil here, who we work closely together with the Orange County Elder Abuse Forensic Center, which has been in operation for over 20 years at this point. It's a true interagency program here in Orange County, which allows us to address some of the most complex cases of elder abuse that we see. So we come at this with a lot of experience, and we'll both be speaking today as to elder abuse. And then at the end, talking a little bit about how changes in condition, or how Meals on Wheels administrators and drivers might become aware, or might come across cases where clients are subject to abuse. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. We would be really remiss if we didn't start this presentation out with a note about ageism. This affects the way that all of us in society really view elder abuse. If we look at some of the assumptions that we've heard, to those of us in the field of aging, we may see through this, but to a lot of society, there are a lot of, I think, misperceptions. So starting off with, personality. She's a sweet old lady, or he's a crotchety old man. I mean, it's as if someone's personality, bingo, just changes once they become 65. It's not as if they have their personality their whole life. In geriatrics, we hear a lot of patients and families come in saying, well, her memory's bad, but that's just part of growing. That's just a part of growing old, right? To which we say, no. Let's take a look at this. Also, people expect that older people bruise easily, which is true, but now we know some bruising is accidental, and other bruising is caused by trauma. And we also do a lot of work with the coroner's office here in Orange County. So we hear a lot of statements like, old people are supposed to die. And to that we say, yeah, eventually everyone dies, but were they supposed to die that way at that time? So we have to look past ageism when we approach elder abuse. Next slide, please. So specifically, ageism is a systematic stereotyping and discrimination of people based on their age. It's often overlooked, and age prejudice is observed on a societal level and a personal level, whereas older people are perceived as a fairly undifferentiated group with negative traits, mostly negative, as I mentioned, including being forgetful, being inept, ailing, and irritable. And these misperceptions tend to always devalue individuals and their aptitudes and abilities. So for elder abuse, this translates into elder abuse not being as important, perhaps, as child abuse. We've had cases where we had one case I can remember specifically where a daughter brought her mother to work but left her in the car, and her mother was, suffering from dementia, as if that were okay to leave your mother in the car for 8 hours. If we looked at a child, her bringing a child to work and leaving an 8-year-old child in the car, well, clearly that is wrong. But to her, there really wasn't anything wrong with bringing her mother to work and leaving her in the car with no ability to leave. So we can see this in many, many, many areas. And oftentimes in the world of elder abuse, we actually compare some of our cases to child abuse, just so we can actually, get a reality check on how we're actually perceiving or doing something. And Jorge, if you'd like to jump in at any time, feel free.
I will, and certainly, one of the comments I would have at this time is that elder abuse is underreported, just as child abuse is, and it's important to mention to the audience that usually the eyes and ears of the protection system are those folks out there serving the community. So it's important to pay attention to some of the signs that we're going to be talking about in the next few slides.
Thank you. Next slide, Minka, please. Okay, ageism is what allows a nursing home administrator to state the following. All he did was lift her nightgown and rub her breasts. Nobody got hurt. But we must ask, really, like, what would have happened if this were a resident of any other age? What if this were his teenage daughter, right? What if this were any other dependent? But really, it's ageism that really blinds us to really the truth. Next slide, please. So the bottom line really is that acknowledgement of abuse often requires us to challenge our ageist perceptions. And if we acknowledge this, these statements on the right, that ageism equates age with poor health, or ageism provides an excuse for poor care and unacceptable situations, we must ask ourselves and double check ourselves with our perceptions on the left. So when we see something and we're not sure if it's really appropriate or okay, we can always ask, you know, is it okay for this person to live this way? And sometimes we insert our own family. Would it be okay for my parents to live this way? Or would it be okay for someone I love to die this way? And that's how we always provide ourselves a reality check in the midst of society with ageist tendencies. Next slide, please. This is an extreme case, and it's not one case. We see this over and over again. We may have perhaps a 93-year-old last seen by a Dr. X many years ago. Could be 1, could be 5. Usually having dementia. Usually having had medications in the past, but no recent refills. Really undernourished. We've seen this over and over again. Somebody may weigh 80 pounds when they present to the emergency room, you know, at 5'3" or taller, with pressure sores, poor hygiene, long nails, unkept appearance, and again, often brought into the emergency room after it's too late, or even dying at home and having the caregiver call the police. These cases have gone to court. In one case, we had a caregiver who was a daughter who adamantly stated that her mother would never ever want to go to the doctor, so she didn't force her to go. There was one case in Los Angeles a few years ago, argued in court, whereas the jury favored the caregiver because they believed her that her mother would never want to go to the doctor this way. This brings up so many ethical and moral situations that we have to address. Again, as a society, but this is a situation that is not unusual, and it is a profile of something that occurs again and again and again. And in fact, just this past month, I reviewed a case of someone who left a nursing home probably earlier than they would have due to the COVID pandemic. So the nursing homes, you know, people wanted to leave nursing homes so they wouldn't be exposed to COVID. And this person actually ended up going home to be under the care of a family that really was not equipped to care for her at all. And this is a very common situation. But again, you know, how can we identify these situations and how can we prevent these situations? Okay, next slide, please. We have a theory in geriatrics called the heterogeneity theory of aging. And this also disrupts our assumptions of ageism. We could be more ageist in the way that we look at, you know, typical two-year-olds, right? We know what skills they're developing and what to expect. We know pretty much what a typical 13-year-old can and cannot do and how they drive us crazy. But if you look at 80-year-olds, really, there's absolutely no typical 80-year-old, right? I mean, if you look at this picture, we can imagine that there's one 80-year-old riding his bike through town and the other one's struggling to get across the crosswalk with a walker. Okay, so again, just remember, we always try to remember that we make no assumptions in aging, but that's what makes our field so interesting. So on to prevalence. I think all of you probably are aware that it's extremely, as Mr. Soleil said, very underreported, but extremely common. We have more and more studies coming out, but the 3 that I've listed here are accepted as general knowledge. The first one, 1 in 10 community dwelling older adults experienced some form of abuse in the prior year. And this was a telephone survey. with almost 6,000 people with a 69% answer rate. The next one, over 1 in 10 over 70 years of age or older had experienced some form of abuse in the past year. So again, we have 10%, we have over 10%. And that same study said that the odds of experiencing abuse were 4.53 times greater for those who experienced healthcare insecurity, so lack of healthcare, than for those who did not, which also speaks again to having a primary care physician at least and having regular healthcare.
And Dr. Gibbs, I think at this time it would be good to mention the silver tsunami effect. I'm sure a lot of people have heard this term, the silver tsunami, which refers to the boomer generation aging out. And as we do, the number of individuals needing services and maybe also subject to possible abuse and neglect increase. I mean, statistically, it is said that by the year 2030, which is just, 7 years from now, there will be over 70 million elders in the United States alone. And that compounds the problems if you add that to underreporting and the number of individuals that are aging out. Is something to consider.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, next slide, please. So for every, and go ahead and you can go ahead and tab it. Thank you very much. So as we noted and again illustrated, elder abuse is underreported. And at this point, we feel like for every 1 case of elder abuse that we know about, 23 remain unknown. And it's even worse for financial abuse. For every 1 case of financial abuse, 44 remain unknown. So this is a monumentally huge problem. The next slide, please. And what's worse really is what we don't know, right? So this is just in bar graph form to show the extreme differences between what we know, which is the little green bars at the bottom, between what we really don't know what's going on, which is the orange bars at the top. Okay, next slide, please. So reporting, so both self-reporting and also reporting from others, whether it's healthcare providers, neighbors, or those in the community, is extremely low. Help seeking through reporting to police or other authorities occurred only 15% of the time from victims themselves. And again, we do call out low reporting from healthcare professionals because we are in a position where we can recognize this. I think even more so sometimes than those in the community. Yeah, we have a very long way to go in terms of improving our numbers. So there are many reasons why people feel like healthcare in particular doesn't report as much. Many people in one study, nurses cited time as a limiting factor, as well as physicians, or that other patient care issues, including time, trust in the clinician-patient relationship, really outweighed the importance of detecting and pursuing suspected elder abuse cases. To that, we disagree, but suffice it to say that reporting is low no matter where you look, and this is something that we all need to work on. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and go ahead and tab. So many reasons why people don't self-report, or even perhaps why others don't report. Consequences to the abuser. So in many families, there are family dynamics that exist. And although a parent may not want to be abused, they may also not want the abuser to be arrested or to go to jail, for instance. They may be afraid of being removed from the home. That is one of the most common threats, is for the abusers, to threaten that if they tell anyone, they will remove them to a nursing home. Okay. Again, shame and embarrassment is part of being a victim. And that, again, is something that we can all work on and reverse. Rationalization is often the case when people don't really realize that they're being abused, or maybe they've grown up in a family dynamic situation where they're used to being treated poorly. There are many, many cultural factors as well as just victims being completely overwhelmed and really not having the confidence or self-efficacy in terms of being able to speak up. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. Or one back. Or one forward, yeah. Okay, great. We don't have a lot of time today to go in depth to each of the types of abuse. So we'll just say a few words about each type and provide some examples. And probably all of you are aware of the types of abuse. One thing we don't often consider with physical abuse is that that's in addition to hitting, slapping, kicking, punching, and the typical things that we think about, physical abuse also includes misuse of medications, either overusing medications, let's say to keep somebody sedated, or underusing, such as in the case of Parkinson's disease, withholding medications so that someone's not able to move about as freely. Force feeding and restraints is also considered physical abuse. Emotional abuse is something that's not mandated reporting in California, but it does set the tone for all the other types. And usually if you have any other type of abuse, you're going to have emotional abuse at the foundation of that. Financial abuse takes multiple forms, and we'll be reviewing some of those. Sexual abuse of older adults does happen. It happens in communities and it happens in facilities. And we do see regular reports of sexual abuse, even though that may be hard to believe in many cases. And neglect is really the most commonly reported at about 50%.
And Dr. Gibbs, statistically in Orange County, which I'm sure is probably similar in other counties, financial abuse is the #1 type of abuse that is reported, usually followed by neglect, which includes self-neglect and then physical abuse. So those are the top 3 categories in Orange County.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Nika. Some of the most identifiable risks for abuse, of course, we have age, which we won't argue with. Dementia. So it is thought that 1 out of 2 persons with dementia are subject to abuse over their lifetime. Depression is well known. Again, loneliness and isolation play a key role in many cases. In many ways, the abusers are very aware of those that are vulnerable to undue influence and can be swayed to make decisions against their best interests. Those that require caregiving needs, whether it's physical or of a cognitive nature. Those that have a history of abuse tend to have recurrent cases of abuse. And again, lack of advanced care planning plays into one's vulnerability, especially if there are no plans for, estate planning or planning of a person prior to losing capacity.
And Dr. Gibbs, if I may expand a little bit on the age factor, because within the age factor, the incidence of elder abuse increases significantly with age. So in the age group 65 to 69, usually the incidence of abuse is 1 in 78, but then when you look at the 85 plus, the incidence of abuse is 1 in 17. So as the older individuals, those that are 85 plus, are more susceptible to abuse, particularly financial abuse through scams and things like that. So it's important to take into the consideration the age groups too within. Yeah.
Thank you. And then I should make one footnote that I should have made earlier, which is that we speak about elder abuse, but in California, this also applies, of course, to dependent adults who could be 18 to 65. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so let's think like a potentially an abuser thinks. I mean, this is how I try to protect my patients. I think about what they look for. No, let's say we have a financial abuser. Where are they going to look? I don't know if any of you recognize this gentleman. His name was Willie Sutton, and he robbed banks. Somebody asked him, well, why do you rob banks? Well, you go where the money is, and you go there often, okay? Same thing with retired folks. I mean, people assume that retired older folks have spent a lifetime, in many cases, saving up for their retirement. So who has money sitting around? It could be retirement. Not everybody, but in general, this is what people look for. So there are people that actually make a living, so to speak, out of looking for these situations. Okay, next slide, please. There's so many types of financial abuse, anywhere from telephone scams and lotteries, people that, you know, the victims do not know. They are looking for these seniors. They're looking for actually seniors that have been victimized before. We know that there are telephone lists that are bought and sold between people that do this sort of work, and people that have been victimized are again at higher risk of being victimized again because their names are passed along. And it's hard to believe, but there's a whole underground here in terms of selling and acquiring this information. So it's a very sophisticated operation in many cases. So our tips, you know, again, if we're looking out for our clients or our patients or whoever we're responsible for or we communicate with, you know, I would just tell them, don't answer the phone and don't answer your email from unknown sources, and always be skeptical. In fact, one more thing, and I'll say that when we go out to houses and investigate some of these cases with APS workers tell us that they can go into these homes and the phone will literally be ringing off the hook for the entire time that they're in the home. And this just builds and builds and builds until these people are subject to these calls all day long.
I was just going to add, Dr. Gibbs, that this issue is also compounded when you have an individual that may have some memory issues. We have a case right now, we're working at the Forensic Center, where we have an individual that has basically given away $400,000 of her saving to scammers. And she recognized that she's being scammed, but she forgets and she continues to answer her phone and continues to engage with scammers. Mm-hmm. So it's a very difficult situation when you have some cognitive impairment and memory difficulties, you know. Absolutely, and they know it. And there are people out there that will read the obituaries, right? So that they know if someone's spouse just recently passed away and whether that person might be newly vulnerable or newly lonely. So that, you know, with the right approach, you know, someone can get in and gain their confidence and then also scam them. So very sophisticated network. Next slide, please. Okay. Again, we have, you know, another type of scam, which is home repair, which may take advantage of folks. I won't go into this in too much detail, but again, our tips for our patients would be get your 3 quotes, get your references, and only work with people that you trust. So if you are, you know, have Meals on Wheels drivers and realize that there's a lot of like home renovation going on, and maybe a person lives alone in their home and you're kind of wondering, you know, why? There could be, you know, a contractor involved that's taking advantage of somebody, doing a whole lot more work than is necessary. So these things could be, I think, easily visible. Okay. Next slide, please. Exploitation by trusted others and new others. Again, you know, we've seen a lot of cases where a newly lonely widow or widower might be taken in by someone either younger or maybe older, who knows, but exploited, right, for their assets. We've had many, many cases where people have been conniving and successfully had somebody sign over their property titles
their social security checks, taking them to the lawyers and change the will or a trust, taking out reverse mortgages, adding names on credit cards, ATMs. I mean, you name it. If the asset is there and somebody is looking for taking advantage of somebody, there's a numerous types of ways that this can be done. And again, we would talk to our patients and say, you know, I mean, if we get some advance warning that something's happening, and we have open relationship with our patients that tell us when they're uncomfortable with something, you know, one of the things I ask is, well, just think about this. Does this change really benefit you, or does this change really benefit somebody else? Okay.
And unfortunately, the majority of the perpetrators of this type of abuse are family members. At least that's what we see at the Forensic Center. Usually a son or daughter that has been taking care of mom or dad, and they convince them to sign and change the trust and wills, and they take advantage of that.
Thank you. Next slide, Nika. Perfectly placed. So 90% of the perpetrators are relatives. And oftentimes there is a history also behind that of substance abuse or mental health disorders. Many of the children that are engaging in this type of abuse are over 60 years old, and basically half and half women and men. Okay. Next slide, please.
One more thing on that one, it's also statistically on the, when you have a relative that's abusing, that's the abuser, it's usually, the majority of them is a son, an adult son abusing an elderly mother, usually, either financially or neglect, stuff like that. So, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. There has been a study studying relationships to the victims. And again, as we've noted, almost 50% tend to be the children, followed by spouses, grandchildren, a friend or a neighbor, siblings, and less so in-home service providers. So again, starkly, you know, the reality is that, again, most abusers are related, which is something that we don't often want to admit. Okay, next slide, please. So one of the risks that make older adults very vulnerable, again, is isolation and loneliness. In our county, Orange County, 22% of older adults live alone. And I believe I just saw some statistics in San Francisco that may be upwards towards 30%. I saw that in a lecture recently. So we know that being isolated and lonely, lack of social connection is really damaging, not only to one's situation, but to one's health. And it is associated with higher numbers of chronic illness, higher depression scores, among other health-related issues. And of course, depression is one of the vulnerabilities that we identify as having someone be at higher risk for abuse. Okay, next slide, please. Again, mental health is intrinsically linked to elder abuse as both a vulnerability and a consequence of abuse. So loneliness makes us vulnerable, in some cases makes us desperate for attention and companionship, even from others who may not have our best interest. And depression occurs after having been taken advantage of. It's a normal response to loss. Next slide, please.
I think Dr. Gibbs also is worth mentioning that mental health is also a factor when we're looking at abusers, particularly when they're family members, children. There's quite a large prevalence of mental illnesses on those particular group of abusers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there could be a whole lecture from any one of these slides. So this really is a quick tour through some of the main points of elder abuse that we've learned over the years. I wanted to take a minute too to walk through undue influence. It's really something that's quite hard to capture sometimes, but the definition typically is when people use their role or power to exploit the trust, dependency, and fear of others. They use this power to gain control over the decision-making of a second person. And in the next slide, we'll be showing exactly what steps happen for undue influence to take place. So next slide, please. Nika, thank you. So there is an ideal protocol which developed by two, I think, psychologists, Singer and Blum. And this really does go through a pattern that occurs before the loss happens. So number one is isolation. And in a typical scenario, you have a lonely person, maybe recently widowed, who's very isolated, very vulnerable for attention and companionship, as I mentioned. So the first step of someone who's really looking to really, what I want to say, conduct undue influence is isolation. We want to isolate that person. We want to make that person dependent on us. Okay, so we have more power and control over that person. Then we're able to create emotional manipulation, slowly taking over, more of the decision-making, creating more of a primary role in a person's life, and really starting to emotionally manipulate what goes on in that household. So at this point, someone's family and friends are probably disconnected. Maybe they're calling, but the new person in their life is saying no, they're not available to talk, and slowly cutting off these relationships that would normally be there to really try to protect somebody. And then eventually there's an acquiescence of the victim towards this person. And finally, the loss, whether it's monetary or whether it's other types of abuse that go on in that relationship. So there is a pattern that we see that occurs over and over and over again. And once you see a number of these cases, you start to really identify how this happens. Okay. Next slide, please. And one of the common themes, again, our victims are isolated from any support system. But remember, they may still seek healthcare, and this is what we tell our students. They may still seek healthcare, so you may still be the only one that will recognize this for them. And I have to challenge even community service providers such as Meals on Wheels. Since you're delivering the meals, you may be that last possibility of protection for these people. So very important to know what to look for. Next slide, please. Okay. I think we'll go a little bit of, we're running, I think, Nika, we're running a little overtime, so we'll try to just hit some high points. We mentioned that people with dementia, nearly 1 in 2 were subject to abuse. So again, just to know again that if you're working with clients that do have dementia, they are at least much higher risk for any susceptible to abuse. Okay. We believe in the earlier diagnosis of dementia. Maybe one back, Nika, please. And for many reasons. And earlier diagnosis allows for caregiver education, planning for safety, mental and social stimulation, optimizing lifestyle, but also the ability to document choices, putting your affairs in order while people still have the capacity to say what they want. This does not happen often enough, and this is what often leaves a gap in the door open for people to come in and take advantage. Okay, next slide, please. So again, we feel that early detection and diagnosis of dementia can reduce incidences of emotional neglect, self-neglect, and physical, to call out a few types of abuse. Okay, next slide, please. Early diagnosis, again, allows patient and family to document wishes about their life. Like if you need caregiving and you're no longer able to really impart your needs, Who do you want to take care of you later on? What would you like your living situation to be? Would you like to be, you know, for instance, if you have a child who's not reliable or maybe has mental health issues, and you know that that could be a really tough situation, would you rather be in assisted living or even a nursing home? I mean, we don't have these discussions fairly often enough, and we should have these discussions. I've had several patients with dependent children who are already abusive, you know, and I said, well, in 10, 20 years, when you may not be able to make your own decisions, do you want this son or daughter taking care of you? And people are very reluctant to say no, but I think at least they need to be really given a chance to think about that. Okay. All right, next slide, please. Again, many physical signs of abuse. And we tell at least our healthcare providers, if you see something unusual, please keep elder abuse at the top of your differential and consider it. And anytime there's an unusual injury, you really need a really good convincing story in order for that injury not to be the result of abuse or trauma. Okay, we've seen some very unusual situations, and I've been surprised at some of the stories that have really actually made sense, but those are a minority. You know, there are certain areas of the body where it's very unusual to have bruises, and let's see, if you look at, you know, the chest, the picture of the chest, very unusual to have a bruise in that area. We think those bruises came from being restrained, as is in the lower right. And again, in the picture of the legs with the scabs, again, not unusual to bump into things, but on the other hand, that many lesions looking that sort of ugly is very suspicious. And in this particular case, these injuries came from, we think, being kicked with steel-toed boots. So again, we have to look a lot deeper and ask a lot more questions when we see something unusual. Okay, next slide, please. All right, in terms of advocacy, you know, we would recommend looking out for clients who have a change in demeanor, who are afraid of their caregivers, who maybe decrease or stop eating meals. Maybe the meals that you deliver are starting to pile up, who have new caregivers, new family members in the dwelling, appear unkept or more confused than usual, have medical problems that are not being treated, for people that don't seem to be going to the doctor's office, or people that just suddenly stop taking their medicine. And I'm sure you all have so many more examples. And next slide, please. And I will let Jorge Soleil finish up with a description of this particular tool before we open up for discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Gibbs. So basically, this is a tool that was actually developed for the Meals on Wheels program in 2011. This was a Master of Gerontology project that looked at developing a practical for Meals on Wheels volunteers and staff to facilitate recognition and signs of elder abuse. And that study is actually available if any of you want it, and I can send it to you. But the tool itself, it looks at, asks volunteers to look at different things. And, you know, you have the mnemonic here, elder abuse hurts. Look for extremely withdrawn behavior. You know, you can read the slide, lots of mails, etc. And it's important, as it was mentioned before, to not assume that other people have observed these signs, and to, if you have a reasonable suspicion, to actually report it. One of my jobs, I worked with social services for 34 years. One of my jobs for 6 years was as the program manager for the abuse hotline. And one of my jobs was to actually talk to mandated reporters that later we found they didn't report suspicions of abuse. And in talking to them, the number one reason they would give me is that they were not sure if what they saw, what they heard, it's abuse. So it's very important for you to understand that as mandated reporters, the law says that all you have to have is a reasonable suspicion. You don't have to have proof that abuse or neglect is occurring. All you have to have is a reasonable suspicion. That should be enough to trigger you to make that call to the hotline in your county and make that report. It is the job of the Adult Protective Services to actually do the investigation and determine if abuse or neglect is occurring. Also, it's important to note that if abuse has occurred in a licensed facility, it is the responsibility of the Office of the Long-Term Ombudsman to make those investigations. However, it's not unusual to see Adult Protective Services and the Office of the Long-Term Ombudsman to work hand in hand, because many times the abuse that is reported in a licensed facility actually began outside of that facility. So this is just so you're aware that when you have individuals in licensed facilities, there may be other, there's another organization that may be also involved doing investigations. What's the next slide here? And,
this is the last slide for the didactic.
Okay, well, then I wanted to definitely underline the statement that it's on this slide. That many people ask, what happens if I file an APS report and there's no abuse, and they find that there's no abuse or neglect occurring? Absolutely nothing will happen to you. As long as you made the report in good faith and you used your judgment to determine that there's reasonable suspicion that abuse and neglect is occurring, there's no consequence to you. Obviously, if somebody files a false report in a malicious way, there are consequences to that. But also, and I like to point this out because it's important to know, there are consequences for mandated reporters if they don't file a report. So just keep that in mind, that as a mandated reporter, you must file anytime you have a reasonable suspicion. And those are my comments at this time.
Okay.
Any questions? Yes.
Back to you, Nika. Thank you.
Okay, we actually need to move on into our case presentation. So I want to thank Jorge and Dr. Gibbs for this wonderful didactic. If you do have any follow-up questions, please go ahead and type them in the chat, and I'm sure they'd be happy to answer, or we can keep it until the end of the case presentation. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and move on into our case. Is Bobby Wartson here today?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, wonderful. So we'll go ahead and move on into our case. Bobby Wartson is joining us from Kings County Commission of Aging. And while Bobby's going to give us an overview of her case really quickly, please think about any follow-up questions you might have for her and how you'd handle the case, perhaps any resources you have at your disposal at your site as well. So I'll go ahead and share my screen, and Bobby, you can go ahead and quickly give your overview of this case.
Okay, well, my case was, we deliver meals to seniors in California, in Hanford. And my staff was out delivering meals one day. She got in the car, she was doing her paperwork. And when she looked over, a senior had gotten in the vehicle. She had her phone laying in the seat. He grabbed her phone out of the seat. She managed to take the phone from him, and when she took the phone from him, she asked him to get out of the car, but he refused to get out. He just told her to drive. So, and it frightened her really bad. When she got back to the office, she told me what had happened. So I called the police. They really didn't want to take a report because we found out that he had dementia. And I found that out because his daughter, she had called wanting to know why didn't he receive his meals. So I was explaining to her why he didn't get the meals. She said, that's not my father's character. She said, and anyway, he has dementia. And my understanding is he's staying in a house that there's people in the garage and there's a house full of people. So my thing is, I don't know how to move forward to help him because I have concerns with sending staff back there.
Okay, thank you, Bobby. Do any of our attendees here have any advice for Bobby or how they would recommend handling the situation?
Do you know if any of the other people in that dwelling are actually formal caregivers or responsible for this gentleman?
I'm not sure, but I do know that over on the driver's side was another gentleman standing there at the vehicle. And when we called the officer said, don't go there alone, pair up to go, because the exact word is that everyone living in that house is mental ill.
Mm. So there may be no one really taking care of him. When you first told the story, I wondered if he was in the vehicle to try to get away from a bad situation, but I don't know if there's, I guess that would be my first question. Is there someone who's actually responsible for his care if he's truly not able to care for himself? It sounds like that might be the case.
I know his daughter is involved in his life because we gave a choice. One of the choices that I gave to her is that she can pick the meals up for him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
but then I'm sorry.
What did she say about that?
She was willing to pick them up. But then another thought was, if it's that many people in the house, how many of those 7 meals are he getting?
Right.
Right, and that's very difficult to control. I mean, you're providing services to that particular gentleman. What happens once those meals are inside the house, it's very hard to determine. I mean, you would like to think that it's going to go to the client that you're providing services to, but it's not unusual that those meals sometimes are shared. So if the daughter is willing to pick up the meals, wouldn't that be a solution rather than not provide the service to this gentleman?
Yes, that's what I told her, that she could pick the meals up.
And she's willing to do that.
Yes, she agreed to.
I just had an observation, just a general observation. This comes mostly from my experience as a field social worker for many years. One of the things that I learned really quick at the beginning was whenever I finished a home visit, any note taking that I need to do or something like that, not to do it in front of the house where I just visited. Usually the recommendation is that, you finish your visit, get in your car, move a few blocks away, find another place to park, and then at that place, you write your notes and stuff like that. Just because you don't know exactly how people react sometimes to visitors and stuff like that. So that's just a general observation.
I agree. That's what I told her. And one of the things that she should have done is always lock the door when you enter in the car. Don't leave the door unlocked. And when you enter, lock it immediately.
Right, right.
Are there
we have some questions. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
We have some questions coming through or comments through the chat. One says, is the home where he lives, is it a group home? And then we have Jackie saying, my concern for the daughter picking up the meals would be that there is nobody gatekeeping to ensure the senior is okay. And somebody else also commented that it sounds like APS might need to be called if he's not being taken care of.
Yeah, that was my thought too, is whether there were any other indications that he might be neglected, whether he might be undernourished or not not very kept, or if he's not supervised, does he wander out of the house normally? Is there any other indication? Yeah.
That was my first reaction, was APS. And I think they've already gone, well, I was told that they've already gone to the house several times. There was nothing they can do. That was his choice if he wanted to live. The home is actually being rented by, I guess, everyone in the home pays rent.
My suspicion is that I think in your referral or case notes, you indicated that law enforcement was familiar with this particular property. I suspect that probably APS has been involved in the past too.
Yes, they told me that they were. I actually called APS, but I did take it a step farther. I called the district attorney, and he told me that all he needed to do was to have the officer to make a case, to just go out there and then give it to them. So I know that there's other agencies that have been looking into this also.
Mm-hmm.
But in this
we have a few people.
In this particular situation, you said that the officer that responded said that they wouldn't take a report because the client allegedly suffers from dementia. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. He said that he wouldn't. And then when I kept pursuing it, they decided that they would make a case. But I found out that they didn't, because I reached out to another officer and there was nothing in the system regarding this.
Yeah.
And
so, but the second officer did put it in the system.
That's not unusual. Sometimes patrol, which are the folks that respond first, are hesitant to write reports and take reports like this. So sometimes that needs to be escalated through the police department, maybe calling the dispatch desk or asked to talk to the sergeant in charge or something about that particular situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And we have somebody asking, is there any power of attorney in place as well for the daughter? And also, why doesn't the daughter move him out of the home? I don't know if that's been mentioned to her or asked.
No, I have no idea. I'm not sure about a power of attorney, but I would probably say no, and it would be true, but I don't know that to be true.
Did you say that the other individuals in that residence are related or not related to each other?
No, they're not related.
Okay.
Yeah. So if he really lacks capacity, then there's really no one on site supervising him. And if his daughter is really responsible, then she might need to step in and move him out, or get him into a situation where he has more oversight.
Mm-hmm. And Vance says, if it's a state-run group home, you can call 1-800-LET US KNOW, and that will ring into a state social worker, which can provide help if it falls within the scope of operations. So that's a recommendation. Then we have Lenise asking, how often are meals being delivered? If it's once a week, ask the daughter to be present at the home to accept the meals, and the driver then can also get a set of eyes on the person.
The home it's a room and board, so it's not a licensed facility. So it is a room and board. And so we could ask the daughter to be present to when we deliver the meals. That's a good suggestion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if this is APS's capacity, but can APS have him tested by a physician for cognitive issues? Somebody's asking.
Well, that depends on your county. I mean, here in Orange County, we have the Elder Abuse Forensic Center, and APS does make a number of referrals to the Forensic Center. And through the Forensic Center, we have a psychologist that actually goes out and does capacity assessments for APS to use, either to make a referral to the Office of the Public Guardian or for law enforcement to use in cases of financial abuse to then file a case with the district attorney's office. So I don't know what resources are available in other counties, but that's what we do in Orange County.
Not going to happen here.
Yeah, but it does sound like, you know, and also we have to question his judgment if he's just going to jump in an unknown person's car. But it, you know, from a healthcare perspective, it sounds like he does need an assessment as to his dimension, potentially his capacity, and he may now or in the near future need more care and more supervision. Because it sounds like he's living independently in a board and care home, and that's really
a room and board.
Meeting his needs. A room and board, sorry, and that's probably not meeting his needs. Oh.
Just be aware also that if this particular gentleman is receiving medical services through the healthcare organization that, I don't know if it's an HMO or Medicare or Medi-Cal, sometimes, you know, you can talk to the PCP and ask that they make a referral to neurology for a capacity assessment. Is that correct, Dr. Gibbs? I don't want to overstate.
Yeah, or geriatric, if you have geriatricians involved, and or neurology or psychologists who are used to working with persons with cognitive impairment or dementia. But at some point in the future or now, I think in this case, it will be very appropriate to do so.
Yeah, and
yeah, great case. I mean, thank you for bringing it. Great case.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have a few last minute things in the chat. Joe says if it's a room and board, you might want to consider having the daughter move the client out of the home. And then one of our HUB team members, Geraldine, said, thank you for sharing your case. I appreciate your approach here. So many variables. I would focus on safety too. So thank you all. Bobby, were we able to answer your questions? Do you kind of have some next steps?
Yes, you were able to answer. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for submitting the case. Looks like we're out of time today, but I did want to let you guys know that if you do want CEs, so please fill out the form. I'll send the link as well in the follow-up email. And your evaluations are always so appreciated. Please be sure to fill out the evaluation form as well. And make sure to join us in our next session in 2 weeks on older adults and falls, presented by Dr. Stagel. So again, thank you so much, Bobby, for submitting the case. And thank you so much, Dr. Gibbs and Jorge, for the wonderful didactic. We appreciate everyone joining today, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.